Hello world, Kevin here. This is basically my demo video for project number 6, the last project for this quarter. We're basically working with the Fragment shader in this assignment. The goal is basically to create sort of a scene with an animated ellipse using the OpenGL Fragment shader, as you basically can see here. The idea with these shaders, they're basically kind of like plugins from my understanding. You could basically write customized code and then they affect different parts of the processing pipeline depending on what shader you're working with. So for example, if you have a vertex shader, that can kind of operate on all the vertices and apply some customized code or adjust the properties. And similarly for the fragment shader, that can also operate on each of the fragments that come out of the rasterizer. And so for this project, we're actually working with both a vertex shader and a fragment shader, even though it says that we're building a fragment shader, but that's more so just kind of the paradigm of how you operate in this space. Basically, we're just grabbing a few things from the vertex shader space, passing that into the rasterizer, and then the rasterizer forwards it over to the fragment shader to basically use those things, such as the textural coordinates or maybe some vectors related to the material lighting. So with that said, I'll go ahead and just show you the demonstration of the program, and then I can actually get into the code and kind of explain how I implemented it. Okay, so this is basically the basic implementation of that ellipse. As you can see, it's basically static. It's not really changing. It has a fixed aspect ratio and a fixed position for its centroid. And then basically I have some additional key bindings that I could turn on. So for example, here's a key time variable. And so now what it's doing is it's shifting the centroid of that ellipse, but the ellipse itself is basically the same shape. Watch that for a few more seconds. And then I'm going to turn off that key time binding and then activate the time-based binding. And so in this case, it's just a function of now time, that normalized parameter from 0 to 1. And so it's basically contracting the dimensions based on time. And then in addition, you could basically overlay this time-based variation along with that key time-based variation of the centroid. So if I do that, oops, now where is it? Okay, there it is. And so now it's both contracting up and down, as well as that main position moving around the screen. And then I'm going to turn off both of those. To sort of make it a little more interesting, I also played around with basically the color. So for example, I think that's D for disco. There you go. And then I also added a couple different objects that you can kind of cycle through. So for example, this one's the OSU sphere. Oops, A. And then this is the torus, for example. And then I also added a Star Destroyer, classic. In this case, I don't think it looks as cool because the way I'm randomizing the key time variable as well as the kind of overall size of the ellipse that I picked, it's probably not sweeping the full textural 0 to 1 space, so it's probably not affecting as much of the Star Destroyer. It could probably be a little more colorful if I optimize that. But just going back to the sphere, I also added, just for fun, since we had worked on textures recently, basically also a texture map in this case. And so as you can see, basically any points falling inside this ellipse, it's basically saying, okay, in that case, draw the texture value. Otherwise, just use, the red base color. And so that's basically the assignment, I think. I'll go ahead and walk through the code real quick. I actually have it summarized here. Okay, so this is the kind of the basic implementation in global scope. I'm defining my random number generator. I uncommented a couple of the includes for the key times, as well as for the GLSL program. That's for our pattern. And then basically I have some key time variables defined here. In the init graphics, I basically am initializing the pattern and then basically creating it. We have two patterns, as I mentioned. We're using a vertex pattern and a fragment pattern for the vertex and fragment shaders. I'll show those shortly. And then these are basically the values that I've initialized those key time variables for. We basically have the centroid, radius, in this case, which I'm not using, as well as some variations for the material color, specular color, and then the lighting coefficients. In the display function, basically this is showing the static assignment. So in this case, basically when I turn everything off, and basically it's just not moving around, right? And then these are basically for the key bindings, for the dynamic assignments. If we want it to shift its centroid around, if we want it to basically contract the ellipse, as well as basically make it more colorful, change the colors and the lighting and so forth. And then here, basically, we're just setting some uniform variables, basically passing it from the main program over on into the vertex and fragment shaders. And then here is basically the code that I've modified for both the vertex and pattern. So for vertex, really not too much, but as I mentioned, basically we're just creating some assignments to pass out to the rasterizer. So here you can see we're getting the textual coordinates, some vectors, and then basically assign those to these out variables, which basically go to the rasterizer. Then from the rasterizer, those get read back in to the shader to basically do this, make these changes. And so the main thing that the fragment shader is doing, it's basically checking, if any of the textual coordinates are falling inside of the ellipse, as defined in this equation, and basically colorizing it. And this code actually, it doesn't show the option for the texture that you see here. I added that in afterwards. And the rest basically has to do with applying per fragment lighting, which is a requirement for this assignment. And the last little bit is basically just for adding the hotkey bindings, which is pretty straightforward. So I think that's pretty much it. So I hope you enjoyed. Thanks.